Welcome, everybody, and hope you can hear me okay. Welcome to the Design Redemption panel. I'm very excited. I think we have four great panelists today, and they not only have, I would say, a breadth of skills and so forth, but I think there's also a depth there that you'll find out as they participate in the panel. And so I'm going to let them introduce themselves and kind of who they are, a little bit of their background and where they're working today. Once they're done, we'll kick things off with a series of questions that we have for the panelists. And we're looking forward to their responses and hearing more about human-centered design and their experiences. And hopefully that will rub off and help you as well. So I'll turn the time over to, I don't know, maybe Pooja, would you like to introduce yourself first? And spirit of volunteerism here. And so if you'd like to introduce yourself first, and then we can go through the other three panelists as well.
Sorry, good morning. Hi, everyone. My name is Pooja Parekh. I am currently a manager of user experience at Starbucks as part of Starbucks Technology. Our team is primarily focused on retail. So what is the technology and their experiences for baristas, shift supervisors, managers, everything that has to do with retail in North America. So that's what we do now. Previously, I've held UX roles and product management roles in startups, big companies such as Microsoft, agencies. I've done it for a long time, and I've held just different roles a lot. I love the discipline. I love design thinking. I love finding ways to apply it to different industries. I think it's really energizing. I also have a master's in human-centered design and engineering from the University of Washington, and I often go back and guest lecture and teach there as well. So I'm really happy to be here, and thank you for this opportunity. Should I pick someone? I'll pick, how about I pick Priyanka to make this easy for both of us?
There we go. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Pooja. And hi, everybody. My name is Priyanka Pathak, and I am the founder and the principal of a little design firm called Samaj Studio. And I'm also a faculty associate at Arizona State University School of Design. And I've worked in social impact and specifically in the global health space for the last decade, maybe more, maybe like 11 or 12 years now, and Samaj Studio is dedicated to working across the intersection of technology, human-centered design, and global health. So that's the field that I work in. My background is, I don't know, perhaps unusual to this panel because I don't have any design degrees. My background is in engineering and in business, but I was always much more interested in how people interact with products, how products and services are made useful, and also working in international development. So I like to say that I fell into design, but it turned out to be the career for me. And yeah, previous to this, I worked at Dahlberg Design. You guys just heard from my old boss, Robert, in one of the previous panels. And I also formerly worked at the World Bank, where I was an innovation specialist for quite some time. So that's me. I'm going to pass it off to Constance to introduce herself.
Cool, thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Constance Chin. So excited to be here today. It's a little bit about myself. I'm currently a product designer at Facebook, and I work on their Messenger app on a product called Messenger Rooms, which is basically how you can video chat from the Messenger app. So really enjoyed that. Previous to that, I've worked at Amazon and Dropbox. So I absolutely love technology and designing for it and being able to be a champion of users' needs within those spaces. And then I also got my degree at University of Washington in interaction design, so go dogs, and currently living in Seattle and enjoying the snow that we just got. But I'm really excited to be here, looking forward to getting to know all the panelists better and just kind of sharing a little bit about my background and experience. And cool, who's next? Federico?
I think, Federico, yeah.
Yeah, so hi everyone. Thank you everyone for joining us. So I'm Federico Del Bono. I actually graduated FUCO in May 2020, so I might have met some of you when I was a second year. Currently, I'm working in Amazon Music. I'm in the Finance Leadership Development Program. I actually don't have a design degree either, but I wore my design and innovation swag. I was on the cabinet for 2 years, so I'm sure the swag must have changed now, but definitely love design. thinking, everything design innovation. And prior to Amazon, I actually worked in the public sector and education for 2 years, specifically using technology within the classrooms and implementing that. And then prior to that, I actually worked in aviation and strategic planning. So definitely two different experiences to what I'm doing now, and nothing. Love to be on this panel, meeting everyone. I'm a proud Section 5er, so hope we have some Section 5 in the audience. And nothing, I'll pass it on to Greg now.
All right. Hey, well, thank you. It's, thanks for taking the time just to help us get to know you a little bit better. And thank you again for being here. And I know all four of you are busy and taking the time out for, in some cases, your fellow students here and some, I guess, more recent than others, but, helping out with the design and innovation here at Fuqua. So I'm going to start off with easy questions. Why don't we do that? We'll go easy questions first, and then we'll get to the really hard-hitting, difficult ones later in the session. And but I want to talk about favorites right now, and so I'm going to prevail again with Pooja on this one. She's been our volunteer here, kicking us off, and I'm curious, and this is open to the other panelists as well, is often, in our career, there's things that inspire us, that maybe that helped us get where we are today, that maybe we're an inflection point in our careers. And then there's things like, once you're in the industry, there's things that strike you for whatever reason, things that are just amazingly done and great for a reason, maybe some things that are not so great, and it's great to learn from those well. But I want to go for the ones where kind of what's your favorite? If you look at an innovation or a product, maybe it's a service or a platform, something out there that you just feel inspired and maybe it just gels with you for whatever reason. Just curious what that is and why, and tell us a little bit about that. And Pooja will start, but then after that, all of our other panelists are free to jump in on that same question as well.
Yeah, I love that question. And it comes up often, right? Like interviews, that question will come up. Just as you get enter this field and as you re-enter this field, because it feels like it's just a re-engagement with this work. And it's really easy for me to answer things like Nest or iPhone. Those are talked a lot about. The one that I was thinking about for this question was actually Grammarly. Grammarly comes up for me quite a bit, actually. I think it's one of those things that it's a product, you might pay a few bucks for it. It might be an add-on into your browser and you might think of it that way. Actually, let me step back. For those of you who don't know what Grammarly is, it is an application, from my understanding, it's a browser add-on. That's at least how I use it. That helps you make your writing more clear and effective. That's like at least a tagline way of describing it. The reason why I think it's so fantastic to think of it as a product is because it helps meet a need. Folks like myself, English is not my first language. Grammar is really important in order to be successful, to communicate. And if you want to communicate, you need to be able to do that in order to succeed. And anything to help me with that is accepted and pleasurable and needed. And so when I think of Grammarly, I think of it as being, one, incredibly useful. It's something that I do need. I need help with, being a little bit more effective with my writing. It enables me to be successful. That I think is a really key trait of a good product. Does its intuitiveness enable you to be successful? I think that's really important. And I think that it is a good example of leveraging current innovation by leaning heavily into AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. So I don't think a good product necessarily needs AI and ML, but it's really fun to see how it's leveraging modern technologies to enable even more new technologies. So that's my answer for this round, at least. Okay,
excellent.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts out there on things that inspired you? And so we have Grammarly app, and so go ahead. Constance,
I was just going to say for myself, and this is kind of everyone's talking about this right now, but Clubhouse has been really an interesting app to just play around on and explore. And when I first heard about it, I was I feel like conceptually, it's actually pretty simple, right? It's almost just like audio Zoom calls, but I think that they've done such an amazing job of honing that really simple technology and designing it for a true user need, especially right now, which is really just connection, and allowing people to feel really comfortable with popping in because it's audio only. And that's something that people can feel comfortable just jumping in and out of. And so I've been super inspired by Clubhouse lately, and it's just fun to kind of explore the new things coming up. I would say that, and then Canva, which I'm sure a lot of you have used, but I just think it's a phenomenal design tool that allows you to, create custom resumes, presentations, and it just kind of allows like everyone to be able to be a designer, which I think is awesome.
Great. I don't know, Federico or Priyanka, any thoughts on this one, or anything jump to mind that you might want to share?
So I don't know, because I've never actually interviewed at a Facebook or an Amazon or anything. So I don't know if this is a cliche answer or not, but a strange one that comes to mind for me is TurboTax. And I think I really like TurboTax, not because I like doing taxes, I hate doing that, but precisely because it takes an incredibly complicated, confusing, and frankly scary subject like doing your taxes and makes it easy and accessible for somebody even like me who, technically I have a business degree, but I still don't claim to know anything about how to do taxes. And I think that that's really incredible that they were able to do that through really figuring out what questions a user would have, what concerns they would have, and being able to allay those fears at every step of the process. And on top of that, they don't forget the human element. So there's always, a place that you can contact a real live person and talk to them. And yeah, a strange example, but I think they did a really excellent job of knowing their user base. Federica, I don't know if you have examples.
Well, all three of those, Clubhouse is the one I know the least of, but definitely TurboTax and Grammarly have saved me. So for me, I guess I might be a bit biased, but definitely something that really amazed me is the Amazon Echo and Alexa. I know now it's been around for like 5 years, but that's something that at the time we had, like iPhones had Siri and then we had Google Voice Recognition. But at the time, no one thought about having like a Pringle can-sized speaker in the bedroom with a built-in microphone on, connected to the internet all the time. So I think managing to change that customer perception and creating that ecosystem around the Amazon Echo and the Alexa. Now, obviously, we have Siri has HomeKit and Google Home, but definitely the innovation behind that product being the first one. And I think Amazon sold like more than 100 million of Alexa built-in. So definitely, I would say that was one of my favorites.
Okay, great. I want to go maybe just it's an adjacent question here to what we've just been talking about favorites. And so I want to delve in a little bit about the development process. And so I think, Constance, I'm going to come with you to you on this one, but here's what we're thinking from a question perspective is, all of us know that products kind of live or die for lots of different reasons, right? It could be pricing, it could be positioning in the market, it could be a feature set that nobody else has. But since we're talking about humans and human-centered design, I'd really like to kind of isolate our focus then on what maybe if you had an experience with a product where that human-centered design insight was key for whatever. It wasn't, it wasn't price that did it. We're not doing a commodity or something like that. It was that insight of humans and how they're going to interact with whatever that product is. And I was wondering if you could share, an instance then, and then, like I said, maybe start with you, Constance, and we'll move to the other panelists of where that success or failure just hinged on that human-centered design insight, and kind of what was that? How did it happen? Was it by accident? Was it planned? Was it because of some model or process or tool that tell us a little bit of the context or the backstory on that, and then how did that play out? How did you leverage that, and what did that look like in the real world? If you've got some anecdotes along those lines as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's a great question, just because I think as designers and product thinkers, one of our most important jobs is advocating for our user and making sure that the problems that we are solving are based on actual user needs and have a balance between like what the business needs and the user needs. And it's so crucial for us to be able to speak up. So an example that comes to mind is during my time at Dropbox, I worked on a team that built third-party integrations with Dropbox. So our goal was to allow Dropbox to be more of like a collaborative workspace where people would come, like hang out, get their work done, collaborate, and they'd be able to use third-party tools like Zoom or Slack to be able to collaborate and like send and share files, but stay on Dropbox. So we worked for about 6 months building custom integrations with Zoom as well as Slack and Dropbox. And all of those integrations were actually starting at Dropbox. So we built integrations that we felt we were super proud of, and we felt that those were based on user needs. But when we actually took a step back, what we found is that users aren't hanging out on Dropbox, at least not right now. They're hanging out on those third-party tools. And so we could have built the best integrations ever, but our users wouldn't be drawn to those because they're actually hanging out on the third-party tools, they're hanging out on Slack, they're hanging out on Zoom, and they want that Dropbox content to come to them. And so what we had to do is take a step back and then reevaluate of how we actually start building Dropbox integrations on those third-party tools. So it was actually a huge shift in strategic direction, but really helped us to build a product that would be like helping our users where they are. And we were able to gather those insights by really leaning into not only like the qual side, but also the quant. So like what was the researchers saying? What was that qualitative feedback? And then also what was the data saying? So what was the quantitative side? What were the numbers showing us? And all of those kind of helped us strategically pivot, which, you know, I say that looking back, and it was really difficult because we'd put a lot of effort into these integrations, but I think that always leading for what you think is the best thing for your user is the best thing that you can do, even if it's challenging sometimes.
Great. Others on this same topic of, you know, a insight that was crucial for whatever reason to something you were involved with.
I can jump in. I love this
Sure.
question.
Thank you, Pooja.
So like Constance, previous example, prior to Starbucks, I was at I like to call it a started up. It was a growth stage startup when I joined. By 4 years later, it definitely had well over 400, 500 people. So, but it was a legal startup called Avo. And the way that it's a website, the way our site was set up was one half of it was legal Q&A. Think of it as like Yahoo Answers. Hey, my landlord is being a jerk. What should I do? What are my legal rights here? Attorneys would come in and answer for free. You got some free advice. And it was great for the person who's asking the question because it gave them a little bit of direction. And it was good for the attorney because the attorney got a little bit of promotion, right? Their name is right there. They answer the question. And not so many words to be like, call me if you need to take this any further. I'm available. So we had this like free Q&A aspect. And then we had this other half of the site, the program, which was our directory. So, hey, think about it as like your Yellow Pages online. I'm looking for a lawyer. I need a landlord. I have a landlord situation. I need a lawyer. Who are all the lawyers in my area and what are the reviews and ratings? So we already had those two and they were doing really well and folks were coming to them. They were getting used. Business was happening as intended. But what we also started observing was that people would come in and ask those questions on the Q&A part and say, and the responses would be, hey, it sounds like you need to hire an attorney. Hey, the situation really requires you to maybe talk to a lawyer. And you would see that over and over again. And we could measure through our analytics that these folks weren't necessarily taking the next step to actually hire the lawyer. So that's when we started digging in and saying like, why wouldn't you, like, you're clearly getting this advice that says talk to a lawyer. Why are you not talking to them? And so when we dug in and we had to talk to a lot of different people with a lot of different situations and a lot of different scenarios. And so really it's putting that ethnographic research on it. It's really putting that, you know, just understanding empathy, just really gaining that empathy before saying, hey, we have a solution or we need to fix this, or like just step back and understand what's going on. And that was really eye-opening for us because where we learned was that there was so much friction between understanding how much it costs to hire a lawyer. Who should I hire? What's the best lawyer? What is it that I actually need? Because kind of like TurboTax, like it's sort of hard, but it's not like at a very simple way to pick up the phone and call someone, but it's personal, it's consuming, right? And so we learned very quickly that price is a barrier, selection is a barrier, and just understanding what all those friction points are. Then being able to take that and create hypotheses that enable you to say, hey, let's try something. And it's really coming up with that hypothesis mindset that says, let's try something. It doesn't have to be a full-fledged answer, but like, at least let's get some signals that say like, hey, we might be able to alleviate or make this less of a problem. I can talk into the solutions about that, but really what that helped us understand is like, lower the price, make the price obvious in that scenario. Connect you with somebody who is obviously well-reviewed and rated, and connect you fast, right? And connect you with somebody who's local. There was a perception that you needed to talk to a lawyer that was in your county. The reality is that's not actually the case, but the perception is that that's there. So we also had to meet that perception for our users as well. So that's just like one of many examples, but I think that that one, to Constance's point, it really helps change the strategic direction of where the company at the time was going. It changed the direction of how we understood our users. And it fundamentally changed the way that we were serving our audience and helping them meet their needs better, right? It comes back to them finding something that's useful and usable for them. So that was a really long answer, but hopefully that was useful.
No, that's great. Thank you. Any other thoughts? We can move on, but I'm happy to, if anyone, Federico or Priyanka, if you have anything, chime in. All right. So I do want to go with Priyanka on this next one, though. So this is a question here. What I want you to do is kind of dial the years back a little bit and kind of imagine yourself when you were first starting in a human-centered design. Maybe you barely knew what it was, right? You heard about it, maybe you knew it was important. And then so think of that version of you, and then maybe think of some folks on the call today who are perhaps on the periphery. They go, I'm here because I know I kind of should be. I know it's important. Or I want to learn. I just want to learn more. I want to be able to do this, but I don't really know where to start. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on what's that entry point, where either it's advice back to your former self on what you should do, or for the folks who maybe are on the periphery and want to dive in and are not quite sure. What's your advice from them? What's your recommendation so they could get going and kind of go maybe on a path similar to what you've been able to accomplish?
Sure. Well, okay. So if I had to go back and tell myself all this, putting myself in my 10 years ago mindset that I had, I was coming out of a master's program in informatics, which is a very, engineer heavy program. And I had heard a lot about design and I knew kind of what it was. And I knew generally that it was my interest, but I also thought of it as just common sense at the end of the day. And in some ways it is, there's a lot of common sense thinking that's associated with it. But what I would have told myself, and what I would tell you now, is it's still a process and it still requires training. It's not just something that you can sort of pick up and do whenever you feel like it because you heard some things about it on the internet, right? So I would really encourage you to look for opportunities to be trained, whether that's taking coursework on it or, training under somebody who is a designer and who can walk you through the process and you can learn, because it is one of those things that you learn best by doing. I mean, you could take a class on it at the end of the day, but if you don't actually practice it or go out and see what it's like in the wild or, in real life, I think that's the way that you're going to really get the value of it and really understand. And there's processes, there's a whole toolkit to turn to. There is some element of a science to it, despite it being a creative discipline, right? And so I would certainly say to not underestimate how much work goes into actually becoming a designer and being trained to be one. And yet at the same time, don't feel like it's a completely like a separate discipline that requires like a PhD and 40 years of experience to be able to get into, right? It's something in between and it's doable, but just, seek out opportunities to learn and practice it. That's what I would say.
Yeah, great. How about others on the panel? What advice would you give for those folks who are, on the diving board, but not quite sure how to dive into the pool yet? What does that look like? What would make them? Another is not just what to do, but also what would make them. What's a successful first step, right? What's one that would have a high value? And in addition, Priyanka, you're talking about it's a process, right? And you need to learn that. So what might work for them best? What's the most efficient way to do it?
Yeah, I think I would say like just utilizing all the tools around you. I think like LinkedIn, for example, is a really great tool. Like
Oh, good
just
point.
reaching out to people. I think I often feel like I mean, I still do this, but I think initially I was like, I feel like awkward. Like, do people actually want to talk to me? Is it weird to reach out and be like, hey, can we do like a virtual coffee? But people love to be able to help out and give you advice. And it's a great way to just start networking, especially in the current COVID times. Like just reaching out to people that you're interested in that have like interesting jobs and roles or companies that you respect, like reaching out to them on LinkedIn and saying like, hey, I'd love to set up like a virtual coffee chat. Like, are you free? And the worst thing they can say is no. And just to help you start growing your network. And then I think the second thing is just taking any role, even if initially you feel like, maybe this isn't a perfect fit. The best way I've been able to find out what I like and what I don't like in terms of companies or projects is just by trying and slowly being able to kind of like pivot based off of the learnings that I get at companies I maybe didn't see myself as. Like those were the companies that I loved working for, or vice versa. So I would say just try and learn that way.
Great. Now, Federico or Pooja, anything you want to add, or we should move on, or anything you'd like to share? Or?
I always like sharing, so I'm gonna.
No worries. Jump in. Have at it.
Yeah, I would totally echo everything that was just said. And something that Constance just said about, it might not be the dream job or the title. I hear so many people are caught up on the title of a job. It must be a UX designer, must be a UX researcher, or whatever title you're hoping to see yourself in. And the reality is that this is a mindset. Design thinking is a mindset. Human-centered design is a mindset. And it's a process. It's a process that you need to bring a lot of people on and along for the ride. And so, and you have to try it on for size, and it doesn't come with a title. Like that process, like we're talking to a business school right now. Like it doesn't come with a title. It doesn't come with the design title. But it's that process, it's that mindset, and you have to get a lot of buy-in along the way for it to be successful. And so to build those relationships, to build those strategies, to build that execution, those skill sets are so like table stakes and so basic that it doesn't even matter what you're doing, just like being able to do that. So take that first step, get that job that you can get into if that's really where you're at right now. And I understand the industry, and I talk to a lot of people, and it definitely feels like that. But those skill sets will take you through this discipline. I promise you. Right? Just being able to work with people, understanding the technologies that people use at work. I remember a job that I had a few years ago. I had a new grad who joined my team. She was amazing. And she actually came from Duke. Actually, in hindsight, she actually came from Duke. But I remember looking over at her, and she was so frustrated. And I just, I was like, hey, yo, what's going on? And she was like, what is Outlook? What is this thing called Outlook? I grew up on Gmail. Everything I've used as Gmail. And it's like, oh yeah, you're in enterprise now. Enterprise folks use Outlook. Like this is a thing. Sorry, sorry to break the news to you. But like even that skill set, like just understanding the way that work is done, it will enable you to succeed at what it is that you're trying to achieve. And so that's just me bouncing off of what I already heard here.
Yeah, Pooja, you're totally right. And I would also want to echo that, because I think sometimes the value of design is not necessarily from the people who have roles as designers, but people who have other jobs, but incorporate and infuse design into everything that they do. So in my field specifically, I work with a lot of people who are global health specialists and people who, specialize in a particular area of public health. But from speaking to these people, as they take the principles of design thinking and really learn to view and understand the people they work with, their constituents, their users, whatever you want to call them, it brings a new lens to the work that they do, and it helps them do a better job at the end of the day, because they can understand processes and people a lot better and bring those insights to work with them. So even if they're not designers on LinkedIn or on their resumes, I mean, they more or less are doing the same job. And so Pooja, you're absolutely right. And I think there's a lot of value there.
Yeah, I think all four of you have, shown multiple examples of sort of design as a personal pursuit, with your own experience and things that you have that you've come in contact with, things you've learned with. I want to shift things just a little bit, and I think we would all agree that design is really a team sport, right? You're going to be part of a larger team. Priyanka, you were just talking about folks that you maybe came in contact with, had an insight that maybe that wasn't their main focus, but you learn from them, right? And we learn from other people. And so human-centered design, let's think of that as a team sport. How do you make that happen? Maybe you were fortunate and you just entered into an organization where that was revered and just part of the DNA. Or, you know what, you're that lone voice and everybody thinks you're kind of crazy and you do kind of the designy weird stuff, and you might be that person sometimes too. And you might share both of those, throughout a career. But we're here at Fuqua. We advocate making leadership choices. So if you're going to come in and you want to lead with human-centered design, how do you do that? How do you make a culture, the norms, the standards, the behaviors around human-centered design? How do you make that normal and operational as part of a culture? And it's that's a really hard question. I'm going to preface that, and but how do we do it? If we're going to be successful as designers, we need to make that cultural change. And where have you found, either from your own experience or maybe you've observed it in others doing this, where have you found that works, and what advice could you perhaps give to folks who are in that position and want to be able to be more effective?
Mm-hmm.
I could take a stab at that first. So
Please.
in my work, I come across this situation all the time where I'm asked to, come in and maybe help with some design work with a team that maybe necessarily doesn't see the value of it or doesn't really quite understand what it is. And so I would say the best way to be able to sell design, for lack of a better term, is to just show how it can be really impactful. And most importantly, explain what you're doing at every step that you're doing and provide a why and a rationale for why it is what you're doing. Because sometimes, I hear from clients that I've worked with and just other partners that people think of design as, oh, it's just people who use sticky notes, or like they're just the folks that put Post-its on the walls and I don't really know what happens with it, but you dress cool and you use Post-its, and that's what I know of design. And obviously, there's so much more to it than that, right? So every time I've had a client or a partner who is maybe a little skeptical or hesitant of the process, I make sure to first include them. Even if they don't necessarily love it at first, I find that they eventually start to get interested and see the value. So, letting them be part of the process and be firsthand there and present. But again, like I said, also explain at every step why I'm doing what I'm doing. Okay, we are going to go out and talk to these customers because you and I are not these customers, and we really need to understand what it is that they think. And we are going to ask questions that are not leading questions because we don't want to influence what they're saying, right? So really just being mindful of explaining, almost teaching it, I guess, without coming across like you're teaching it. But I found that that's the best way that helps people really appreciate the value of design and the impact that it can have in their work.
You remind me, what you said reminded me of a book. What is it? I don't remember the author's name, but Articulating Design Decisions. That's one of those books that I go back to and skim. Like every time I pick it up, I'm like, oh, I'm going to learn something new if I skim this for 10 minutes, and just reminding myself that I do have to articulate something that is a little bit intuitive for us because we're already in this space. And so having to bring people along, I think, is really big. I would add to that, and so much of this topic is what my work at Starbucks really is right now too. But really the most simple way I think of it too, just bouncing off what you said, is once you see it, you can't unsee it. And the value of this, once you start seeing the value of it, it's so hard to unsee the value of it. So finding those opportunities to bring that value to the table so folks can see it and understand it. And you might have to explain it, but like bringing that value, just everything I've done in my career has just pointed to like that. Like once you start doing it, you can't stop. You want more of that. Because the other piece of that I think a lot about is, for me, and the way that I think about that is that we're evangelizing, bringing users through our entire design process. Not just at the end, not just at the checkpoint for requirements, like we're bringing them literally through every part of the design process and helping them set that up. And that's really hard. Folks don't understand that. It's expensive. It takes time. It can slow you down, like all those things. But that it goes back to once you start doing it, you'll just really quickly see the value. The other thing is that it's really often mistaken that design is a resource, but it's really a discipline. And folks will be like, hey, we need wireframes. Can you crank this out in 2 weeks? We're building a thing. And everybody on this call who's had that experience is like, wait, I need to know so much more before I can just like dive into a UI design. And that's not always understood. And helping to shape that for the folks around you that like, you know what, I need to know the context in which somebody's going to use this. I need to understand the problem that this solves. What's the real opportunity here? Like those are real questions that we have to answer before we do anything. So really asking those questions is a big part of that too. But yeah, it's evangelizing. It's a lot of evangelizing for this work for sure. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just I agree with what both Priyanka and Pooja said. And I know that at least from my experience during the MBA, I had some experience doing some of the workshops through the cabinet and the club. But I think one of the examples which was really good was through the FCCP, the Fuqua Consulting Practicum. Our clients was the Chicago Bulls. So we actually managed to do what Priyanka said, to convince the client to let us lead one of these workshops. And in that case, in our team of 6 students, I was the only one who had been on the D&I cabinet. So together we actually built the workshop and did it for the client. And then in this case, the Chicago Bulls, the team we were working with there, they had never done anything like this. So it was exactly how Pooja said, once you see it, you can't unsee it. So definitely bringing the client, or I guess whoever you're working on board, and make them understand the benefits and I guess the entire process. At least in this specific example, it really helped.
Great, thank you. Any final thoughts on culture? What works, what doesn't, ways to influence culture? How can you be a personal, advocate for culture or model or for that?
Patience.
Yeah.
Patience. It's not going to happen quickly, especially if you're.
Yeah.
And building onto that. That goes back to even like what Constance was saying earlier about like getting the job, getting in there, learning how people work around you, gaining that experience, building those relationships. But it really is a bit of a patience game. And then also that sharing and learning, using the spaces in which you are. I know it's a little bit challenging now that we're virtual. In fact, as manager, this is like the biggest challenge I have as a virtual team, because when we were in person, we all used walls. Like even when you were talking about that Post-its, we need those walls. Like we're whiteboarders, we post it. That's how we come together to really brainstorm and blow ideas up in really big ways. And so, like just giving the time for that, giving the space for that. And it's really hard because projects don't carve that. So you also have to advocate for that too. Yeah, but patience.
Great, thank you. You've talked a lot, several you've talked about process. And with any type of process, there's always these catchphrases, jargon, and so forth. And one, all I know of you've heard is this idea of failure and failing fast, failing often, and so forth. And there's various permutations of that phrase. But have there been, but I think we've perhaps, if we could agree, we've seen it enough that we're all, with much of design is an iterative process. And so it's rare that you see a design that is a flawless leap to the answer, right? That's just you jump and everything's perfect. And you hear about it, but it never happens to you, right? And so it's generally an arduous iterative path. And so this idea of failure is an interesting one. And I wanted to get your take on that phrase. And, but actually embodying it in real experience. So what does it feel like then to fail early and often? And then what does it feel like at the end? So maybe when you're in it, that could be kind of part A of the question of when I'm in the midst of the failure, iterative and test and, resolution, when I'm in one of those iterative cycles, and then what's it like at the end, having failed and early and what the outcomes are. And so you do talk to both of those or either, but I'd be curious, your personal takes on failure and its role in design and human-centered insights. Anyone want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, I can. I think that
Thanks,
it's like,
Constance.
when I think about failure, I just almost feel it's like inevitable to the design process. Like it's like you're always failing in some small, like micro way or large way. I think that part of design is using all of the information that you have. Or part of design, or just part of like human-centered design thinking, is trying to make a decision based off of all of the information that you have, whether that's data, user interviews, past projects that have happened, trying to make the best decision that you can. And then it's really, you put the design out there and then you see if that's going to be successful or not. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. But you really can't go through the design process with no failure. And if you are going through with no failure, you're either not being risky enough or not pushing yourself enough. So I think I try to remind myself that every time I fail, that this is part of the process, that everyone fails, and that it will hopefully lead you to more like interesting opportunities and help you to learn. But I would say it's not easy all the time. I think the more you fail, the easier it becomes and the less like soul crushing it can feel, because when you ship a design and it's not successful, or in a business case, a product and it's not successful, like it sucks. And you feel like, I should have thought about X, Y, Z, but it's part of the process. And the key is, like we said earlier, of failing earlier on. So how can you learn about a product before you go and ship it fully? So like, can you throw things into usertesting.com? Can you speak with users? Can you try to get signal earlier so that you can pivot and move really quickly to be able to ship something that you have higher confidence in? But at the end of the day, failure is inevitable, but you will be okay.
Great. Other thoughts on failure and its role in design?
Yeah, so in the space I work in, which is in social impact, and specifically in my case in healthcare and in international development, failure is a bit of a touchy subject because we don't have a lot of room for failure in many cases. There's sometimes very literally lives on the line, and you can't go out and just try and test out a deployment of a product and assume that it's going to get them access to a vaccine or whatever that could save their life. There's less room for failure in situations like that. But part of the benefit of design in spaces like this is that it builds in and allows for small, acceptable and manageable failures early on, so that you can prevent those big disastrous failures that can happen later. And I know that's not unique to the social impact space. That's probably true for pretty much every industry, but it's especially important in a space like this, because if you are testing out, let's say, an app or something that provides you with access to medical care and advice, you don't want to, in the interest of just like trying to get it out fast to get people to have access to this medical advice faster, just ship out something that you think is going to work. Instead, you really want to take the time to understand what it is people need, show early versions of it to people and say, look, please tell me, is this important and useful in your context? And you can then prevent the situations where you would end up with some kind of catastrophic failure of a program that ultimately didn't help or save people that it could have. And the international development space, I can say, is littered with failures. I mean, there are so many stories of programs that didn't work. And there's a million reasons for that. But I do believe that if you bring in the design process and early on, in that phrase, fail early, fail often, I would focus on the fail early. I don't know if I would necessarily, for my purposes, emphasize the fail often piece, but the fail early, I do think is key to being able to prevent later failures and avoid, catastrophic failures, like I said.
I have to piggyback on that early piece for sure. Oftentimes, honestly, this is my reality, is that the ship is already sailing before we're even brought in onto the process. And so we might discover early on, we might find that failure early on, or discover something might not be going the right way that we need to pivot, but the ship is already, the stakeholder, like in our case, it's stakeholders. The stakeholders are already on board, the business is on board, the project is paid for, there's an expected deliverable, like everything's fully going. And so even if you discover things that might not be going the right way, or, your solution might not be going in the right direction, it's really challenging to pull that back, right? Like there's a lot of investment that's already moving that forward. And so that piece that Priyanka was talking about bringing that in as early as possible, so that you continue to reevaluate the strategic direction of where you're going and are able to monitor and adjust that as soon as you can, I think is critical to the success of bringing this in and bringing human-centered design in for sure. And it's really hard. That's where I see the maturity or the lack of maturity in a lot of organizations where they don't understand that you need to bring this on day like day zero, like you need to have UX or design or somebody's thinking about HDD at the table from day one. And that's a big thing. And then also talking about failing fast and just, for some reason, I feel like I'm quoting books all the time right now. I don't normally do that, but the lean startup, that's a bit, or not the lean, yeah, the lean startup is a big, there's this wonderful quote in the book that I remember exactly what it says, but essentially what it's saying is that you will not have success with your first release. You just won't. And if you assume that your first release or your first, what you put out there is perfect, like, no, that means it's rooted in assumptions and like like there's a lot of problems with that. So like going into that, knowing that's iterative and that you don't have 100% success at the first step, that just makes things a lot easier down the road for sure too.
And that's why I think panels like this and even just talking about design at business schools, at public health schools, at different places is so important, because we want to avoid those situations that Pooja was talking about, because I see these too, where designers are brought on when a product's already been released and there's so many things wrong with it. And they basically come to you and they're like, why is nobody using my product? Or why is this not working the way I thought it would? And to prevent situations like that, we need really design-educated, design-minded managers and product people and strategy folks and business leaders and all manner of people who really understand what this process is and what it takes to get something to be successful from the get-go. And so that's why I'm really glad that Duke is putting this together and that you guys are also interested in the topic. I think it's going to be better for all of us at the end of the day.
All right. Well, thank you. I want to, we're not going to dwell on failure forever here, but I do want to go one more area related to it. We talk about this fail early and often, and usually the outcome is a great outcome. It's like if you go through this and sort of manage that ambiguity, you iterate, you learn from small failures so they don't become big failures. But be honest, there's still big failures that can happen. They leak out eventually, and I'm curious if you had an example of something that did fail, and perhaps you didn't learn it. The learning was for later. It didn't save the product. That learning is for later. So I was curious if something failed. Why did it fail? And what was we're never going to do this again, or we've got to make sure we do this again. We have do this next time. What that aha moment that only comes through the depths of pain of something failing, and what was that, and how did it serve as a turning point to maybe better processes for the future for you, or actions? It could be you personally, or you witnessed it, the car crash.
It's a little challenging to talk about because I don't want to talk about past projects. I know this is
counter. It is counter culture. We spoke of culture not too long ago, right? It is. We bury that. We don't want to hear it, and so but it's good. It is instructive. So if you have it'd be great to share if you can.
I think I don't know if this is exactly answering your question, but even talking about like what Priyanka was referring to, like some of these products, a lot of technology. This is not just like one or two things. Like majority of technology does not have the human-centered design maturity applied to it, right? We've been building technology since like before COBOL. But folks are understanding it more and more now. And I think right now we're seeing, we're just starting to learn who our advocates are for this, right? Like we are coming in and advocating for this role, but also starting to understand who our advocates are. So engineering is a big advocate for our work once they understand what we do. At first, it's really hard. It's really challenging. It's stepping on boundaries and whatnot. But once they understand how we're working together, it's a really powerful combination. And so then engineers start asking for, hey, we need design at the table to help us think through some of these problems and address some of these problems. So I think of establishing that culture around you to help support that common goal. But that doesn't always happen, and that fails, right? If the folks around you don't understand what you're trying to do. So when you do come in and you ruffle some feathers and you show the value of the work that we're doing, the value of bringing users and the value of iterating and the value of design, the challenge that I run into, and that maybe just from my job and where I sit at a table, like, is how do you continue to fund that? And funding is a big part of this. Anything that we do, someone's paying for. It's a department, it's a job, it's a company, they're paying for it. So how do you continue to fund this work on those projects? And if you can't continue to fund it, then that walks away. And what you're doing is you're just taking an entire discipline off of a product or a service that you're trying to build. And that's like the biggest failure to me. It's like, oh my gosh, we just did this. You saw the success of it, and then you don't want to do it again. Like, that to me is personally just so painful. It's like, oh my gosh, I thought we had a thing. What happened? Like, I thought you and I were in this together. And so that's where I see failure happen in a way that just feels so sad, almost like it's like a romance just got lost somehow in it. And so I think about failure showing up in ways like that more often than not. So.
Yeah, I think another aspect of failure I've seen is when you lose trust with the team. Like, I think one of the key pieces of a strong team, which in my mind can equal a really strong product, is when you don't have trust between each other. And I think that that's a really key part of just building a team and figuring out how to kind of work in your job, is just figuring out how to build trust with yourself and then with others on the team. I think another piece is that products often fail if it's not a diverse team creating it, and a team that feels like it's just a diverse team, building trust, like all those things are so crucial, making sure that everyone feels included and that everyone's voice is heard. Because what happens, I think, when products end up launching that aren't strong, I think it's oftentimes because it's only one person's voice that led a product. And I think the best products are when everyone's voice is heard and everyone is able to have a say in that.
I can be brave and share a small story, I guess, of how failure affected our project.
Please do.
So back at the beginning of my career, I was working with a vaccine clinic in India, and we were trying to build a SMS reminder system for mothers or new mothers with newborns to remind them to come bring them into the vaccine clinic and get their kids vaccinated on time. And, part of that was enrolling mothers into this SMS system and having a whole backend system set up to maintain all that. And we did a good job with doing all our research, going out, working with teams of volunteers to collect information from all these mothers, to really learn about what their struggles and their worries were, and, any trust issues that came up. But when it came time to actually prototype and test out this product idea we had set up this back end form almost that we needed completed with some basic information about each mother we were going to enroll. And we enrolled them when they were pregnant, so we could get them, from the time of birth onwards. And so we asked them to provide, their name, their own date of birth, their expected due date, and also the gender of the unborn child, and just so that we could fill in the gender category and all that in there. And when we went around and started knocking on doors, trying to enroll some of these pregnant women, they were fine answering some of these questions up until the part where we said, okay, and just so do you know the gender of your child? If you do, can we put it in the system? Like, we just need to know, you can fix it later. So many doors started getting slammed shut in our faces, and they refused to speak to us again after that. And it took us a while to figure out what's going on. Like, why are we all of a sudden turning people away from us? Well, in India, it's illegal to even find out the gender of your unborn child because of the high rates of feticide and infanticide. And so for some stranger to be coming to your door and asking for basically what's almost like entrapping you into providing some illegal information, well, that pretty much killed any trust that we would have built with all these mothers that we were trying to work with in this neighborhood. And thankfully, we caught that early on. I mean, it was only maybe a day of getting doors slammed in our face that took it. We went back and we're like, what's going on? Why is this the issue? But, I think about how if we had done that in a less personal way, we hadn't done it face to face, we may not have hit on this. We would have just had nobody enrolling in our system, and then everything would have fallen apart, and we wouldn't have really gotten to understand why. So it was really this aspect of building a personal connection with people and really using this prototyping process to learn about potential failures that really helped us avoid what could have had some legal implications even for this clinic, right? To be asking for this information. So I guess that's not a story of a failure because in the end we managed to save it, but it could have been a failure. And yeah, it's the value of HCD.
Great, thank you. I want to, any other thoughts on this topic, or we can certainly move on? And so we can put failure behind us here for the moment. And I want to talk a little bit about, delve in just a little bit more into process. And, you know, I think a lot of us are attuned to, you know, things, we talk about sort of this flawless, things just move, I call it flawless moving to the right. You know, if you look at a financial statement, it's going to be, the profits are going to be up and to the right. If you look at a Gantt chart planning, everything flows smoothly from left to right in a beautiful linear fashion. And here we come in and we insert design, which is this messy, ambiguous, iterative process. And the deal with iteration is that there are arrows pointing backwards in addition to arrows pointing forward. And so getting used to this idea that step backwards are part of the process, not a departure. And so what I wanted to ask the panel here is where one of those backward arrows was important for you or into the process, that you move forward, but then you had to step back for whatever reason, and that made the difference. And so if you could share maybe an experience, and this doesn't have to be a failure, we're past that, but just a little bit where that backward step, that pause and that retracement was key to perhaps success of moving forward. You know, you took that step backward and it was strategic and made all the difference. Any thoughts along those lines, that backward step that actually moved you forward?
Yeah, I think that it's an interesting question, but I think that oftentimes in some companies, like taking the time to speak with users and understand the why can be viewed as taking a step backwards, or maybe more of like taking a pause. And I think that again and again, it's been shown to me how valuable speaking to users and understanding the why is. And how if that may feel like taking a step back in the moment or putting a pause or extending the timeline at the moment, it can actually speed you up in the end, because if you are actually designing for the true reason and the why, that can actually give you more velocity because you are aligned on that common problem and you're designing for, you know, closer to the right thing. So I think that oftentimes it can feel like a step backwards, but can lead to something much more valuable.
Yeah, and just to complement what Constance said, actually in Amazon, there's something that we do here is actually you start off by writing something called a PR FAQ, which stands for a press release and then frequently asked questions. And the idea is to really do that working backwards process. So you clarify the thinking, you share your idea, and you communicate what the customer benefits are using language that real customers can understand, even before you start doing this iteration process. So definitely I see that also helping to sometimes avoid some of those iterations, but I do agree that no matter what, there's going to be many times they're going to have to reiterate. But starting backwards, starting by doing a press release of what you envision or what you can imagine in some of those FAQs, definitely I've seen, at least in the culture where I work at, that it's been very helpful. And I know Constance also experienced it at Amazon.
Yeah. So when I worked at Amazon, that was one of my first corporate jobs. And I remember experiencing the PR FAQ for the first time, and I didn't fully understand the value of it at the time, mostly because as a designer, I felt I was such a visual person. And so I wanted to see what it was rather than write it. But kind of throughout the last few years after leaving Amazon, I've realized how valuable it is, because to be able to have a common vision is actually a pretty unusual thing to find at other places, and is so helpful because that vision is going to change. You're not actually going to execute everything in that PR FAQ, but at least you have a general understanding of where the team is going. So I think that's a really good example.
I think your examples, Federico and Constance, are really great, because one of the most common problems I find with clients and partners I work with is problem misidentification. And so they may have already gone further down the line and thought that they were solving the correct problem, but really they hadn't really taken the time to fully understand the situation and the context and the problem. And really that's the step they need to go back to, which is in fact the very beginning of the process, right? And that can sometimes be disheartening to hear. So I think it's important to phrase it in terms of, we're not throwing away everything that you already did. Obviously you've been working with, whether it's a community group or in a particular field or area, none of that is going to waste. I think what we're just going to do is go back and look at the information in a new light and really try to understand what the problem is in that case. And that will come from user interviews. That will come from, any mistakes you might have made when you were testing out this product that you had already tried to test out. And I think stepping backwards doesn't necessarily have to be phrased in a negative light. I think you can just talk about it as reframing or rethinking or putting a different lens on it. And I think that ends up being quite valuable.
Oh, that's great. And you bring up a just interesting thought. I think Priyanka, you were talking about it's this sort of dynamic we can get where we solve the wrong problem to 2 decimal places, right? We're very precise, but we've just solved the wrong problem, right? We did a phenomenal job solving the wrong problem. And so having that retracement or, really, and I think Constance, you were talking about asking that why question's critical of, why are we doing this? What's really the purpose? What's the real problem to solve here? Before we, put in millions of dollars engineering resources, those type of questions can make a difference. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about, we've got about 15 minutes here left on the panel, this idea of success. And so I would offer that we often do not celebrate those successes enough. We're on to the next problem, right? As engineers or designers, we thrive in the world of problems and we love solving them, and then we just want another problem. And so I was curious if you had any examples of where you've actually celebrated the success at some point of, you stuck a flag in it and said, we did something meaningful here, and it landed, right? You felt it versus, look, tomorrow there's just another problem. Okay, what was that like? What do you do to celebrate those, identifying and celebrating those successes along the way? Because it's so critical, whether for it's personal or for the team, that we make note of those. Do you have any examples of where that happened, and maybe what effect it had and what you did?
Yeah, let me, from a management perspective, I think about that a lot from a manager perspective. I have an incredible team of folks who they do great work. They're crushing it. They are on these teams. Everything we've talked about for the last hour is their everyday. How do you have these hard conversations? How do you fail fast? How do you tell somebody something that they might not want to hear? How do you share something that you're really excited about that you just spent the last, gajillion hours thinking through and, crafting, just to maybe have it not heard the way that you wanted to hear or land the way that it needed to land. That is the life of this discipline, for better or worse. But when I think about success, that's something I care deeply about. And it lines up to even my management philosophy. Like, I want everyone I work with to understand that, like, they're doing good work. They're putting themselves out there, regardless of how the project, went. You did it. Like, you actually got up and did this, and this is not easy. It takes effort. And the other piece of that is, please help others understand this. Teach others, share what your learnings are. I realize that that's not for everyone, but that's definitely something that I bring up with my team a lot. And so pause for a moment, write out your case study. Always, always, always take, or at least even the outline of what your case study was. Capture those notes, just have somewhere where when you have to tell that success story again, you can quickly grab it. That's like one piece that I even try to build in time for my team to like have that time to just, put a case study around it, wrap it up. I would love for you to go on a roadshow with this case study. Not everybody has that same level of excitement as I do, but I try definitely to encourage that. The other thing I think are events like this. I really, really love encouraging my team to speak at conferences, to speak at local events like the meetups, things like that, and share the work that they're doing. Because that community that we started talking about in the beginning, like your LinkedIn connections, your network, that's how you start building your community, when you start surrounding yourself by like-minded people who see the work that you're doing and are able to grab bits and pieces of it so that they can apply to their own job. So speaking, conferences. And then the other thing that I've sort of learned is not everybody wants to speak. And so medium.com has like been a really good channel for outlet as well. So write a blog post, just share some high level learning, share what you learned along the way. I guarantee somebody else is, there's a whole group of people listening to this right now. There's people who want to learn this. This discipline is still, in the way that's applied to industry, is still really fresh and it's really new. And we're all still really learning a lot around it. So much so that like we read blogs and we watch videos. Like we don't, like the books are almost, there's definitely books that are very useful and impactful, but like we're moving faster than that. We're moving faster than that. And we're learning a lot faster than that. And new technologies are coming out faster than that. And new code libraries are coming out faster than that. So new devices are coming out faster than that. So this is a really fun field because it's fresh and it's new and it's got a lot of excitement around it. So contributing back to that, you're going to feel that success, especially against some of the success that you may or may not be feeling at work with your job, with your team. So that's one way I definitely think about that.
That's amazing. I think you probably are a fantastic manager. I love all of those things. I will speak a little bit from the IC perspective. So individual contributors, that's what I've been for the last like 6 years or so. I think that, so when I first got my first job, I think that success in my mind was like getting to the next level or getting promoted. And so for my first year at my job, I just like worked like night and day, like just trying to get to that next promotion because I was like, this goes to more, I was like, this is going to make me happy and this is my success. And once I get that promotion, then I'm going to be able to celebrate. And I remember like getting that promotion a few years later and I was really excited, but then like that excitement lasted for like 30 minutes. And then I was back to being like, okay, well, I guess, do I just start working for my next promotion? And I think what it just showed me is there's a little bit of like emptiness in that. Like there's not a lot of, there's just not a lot of depth in those promotions. And what it's really about is trying to enjoy your day to day, and I think it depends on what you enjoy, whether that's like the problems you're able to solve, whether that's the people you're around, it depends, but trying to figure out like, what are your values and what do you really enjoy? And then choosing a company that embodies those and represents that. So I think for me, it's about being around people that I'm inspired by, that have really diverse perspectives and that I genuinely just enjoy working with and have fun with. That's a big thing for me. And so like one of the things that we do every Monday with my team is we have like an icebreaker where we ask like a silly question every day about like, what is your like pump up song, for example? And for me, like that's a little moment of celebration. So instead of celebrating the success of a project, it's more of celebrating the team. But I think for everyone, it's different. Like, I think some people like it's the project, what they're able to create. For me, it's really the people, but there's no right or wrong. I think they're all amazing. Just figuring out what you actually enjoy and what success looks like for you.
Great. Excellent.
For me, one of the biggest benefits of design as applied to the social impact, social justice, what have you spaces is that ethos of having the people who you are trying to serve or trying to work with involved in the process and basically having them solve their own problems at the end of the day, which they can do, frankly, better than I, as somebody who's not part of a community, could do, right? And that's a very powerful idea, even if it's a simple one. And unfortunately, it actually doesn't happen as often as you would think in the international development space, or even just, in community work that people like to do, often because of time or because of, people are stretched thin. They don't necessarily have the time and the effort or ability to go out and talk to all the folks that they want to help. And there's a lot of good intentions, but it just doesn't always happen the way you want it to. And so that's why, to me, whenever a design process is done successfully, to me, that really means that an organization or a group of people or even a particular movement start to really understand and see the value of constantly including the people that they're working with in the work that they do. So an example is, at one time I had this client, I was working with a team in West Africa, and I was sort of the designer who had been hired to come in and support this product that they were trying to roll out. And I had this manager that we were assigned to work with, and he was a good manager, but my gosh, like from the get-go, he was just so against this idea of having designers come in and help his product because he didn't see the need for that. He felt that it was, we were just going to be telling him what to do, and he was definitely the most qualified person to make that decision. And I mean, he made it pretty abundantly clear in all the meetings we had with the things he was saying and his attitude. But we kept at it. We did exactly what we talked about earlier, which is bring him along for the process and try to articulate the value at every step. And it was hard. I mean, there were definitely some clashes involved, but I think my proudest moment for that entire project was when towards the end, he was sitting with his team and we were there as well. And some team member made a suggestion, something about like, oh, we should try this and let's try and do this for this next iteration of a product. And he actually said, okay, but I want you to go out and talk to the people first before we do that and like find out if that's a good idea. Like it was such a small statement, but to me, I was like, oh my God, you get it. You understand. And I see this shift in the way that you're thinking about your work. And if that could happen more often, I honestly feel like we could make so much more progress in the world if we could all just learn to think that way, And it's not always easy, and it's also not always possible. But I think the more you try, it makes a difference. So that's my success in the larger context, I guess, of things.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, we just have a few fleeting minutes left here. I had one very brief final question for you. And I wanted you to put your career coach hats back on from an earlier question. Is what it's not what book to read, what course to take. For our audience, what behavioral change that they could start today that would help them on the path to being a better designer? What's one thing that they could start doing that gets them on that road today? So very, very brief. I know we just have a minute or two here. Just if you had a quick piece of advice on how could they change, what little behavior maybe will get them rolling?
So I know we talked about failure, but I would just say embrace the failure. Like really understand that with each, like embrace it and understand that it's more of a recalibration process. And so really try to, as we mentioned, fail often, fail fast, as we mentioned, but definitely if you're not embracing it and you maybe pull yourself down whenever you fail, don't do that. Instead, embrace it, see it like a learning, and get the feedback so that the next failure won't be as big.
For me, I would say
I'm sorry, Priyanka, go ahead.
Oh no, it's okay. I would say actively practicing putting yourself in the mindsets of other people, especially when they're people who are A, super different from you, and B, maybe somebody you don't always agree with on things. I think that's actually, there's many opportunities to do that, especially here in the US, I would say, in this day and age. But I think it's hard to do that. But if you cultivate that practice in yourself and try to actively, be the kind of person who puts themselves in the shoes of somebody else, I think you'll find, you'll get a tremendous value as a designer out of that, because you will learn to start thinking from the perspective of somebody else who's not you. But also, honestly, I guess it makes you a better human too, right? To be thinking about things from other people's perspectives. So that's what I would suggest.
Right.
I think I would say remembering that everyone has imposter syndrome. I remember that I spoke with one of the most senior designers I've ever worked with, and I idolized her. I thought she was phenomenal. And I was just convinced that she probably had no lack of confidence, no self-doubt. And she was like, oh yeah, I have imposter syndrome all the time. I always think to myself, how did I get here? Do they really know? Maybe I'm not capable. Everybody has those doubts. Doesn't matter how far along you are in your career. So just keep going, keep trying to believe in yourself, write some inspirational things on your computer screen, whatever you need to just try again, because we all will fail, but you can make it and you've got it. So yeah, just remember that. Yeah. Oh, Greg, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. So I think we need to end here. So thank you so much. Just a round of applause for our panelists here for sharing your wisdom and your time. And thank you. It was a great session, and appreciate you being your candor and honesty and sharing a lot of the great work that you've done out in the world. So thank you for that and helping us all learn a bit more today.